Hey, this is Sally Young, and I want to welcome you to Episode 5 of Everything New Orleans, the podcast, where we talk about all kinds of things that come from my hometown, but mainly we focus on traditional New Orleans music. Today we got started with two musicians born and raised in the city of New Orleans. Roderick Paulin, the son of trumpeter Ernest Doc Paulin, who is the leader of the legendary Paulin Brothers brass band. Roderick is known for playing sax and more recently playing clarinet like his late brother Rickey did. And Mark Braud, the son of Dwight and Joyce Braud. His mama's brother is trumpeter Wendell Brunious, Mark's uncle. Mark is also the nephew of John Brunious Jr. and grandson of John Brunious Sr., all professional trumpet players. Later, we're joined by drummer Herlin Riley, son of the late Betty Lastie Williams, and a member of the Lastie musical family, including Frank, Walter, David, Melvin, and Joe Lastie. And he's a cousin of James Troy and Glenn David Andrews. One of the things they have in common is that all three of them grew up in musical families surrounded by traditional New Orleans music. They grew up in three different families, but music made them all part of the family of musicians from the city of New Orleans. It's got to be a really unique experience and probably one of those only in New Orleans things to grow up and be immersed in this culture. I mean, y'all didn't come to it. You didn't move to New Orleans. You didn't fall in love with the music at some point. You were like weaned on this music. I guess we'll start with Roderick.
I'm really excited to be here, Sal, and this is such a great opportunity to be able to tell the few stories. I grew up immersed in the music of New Orleans from the day I was born. I'm the youngest of 6 siblings that are professional musicians. Started out by my father, Ernest Doc Paulin. We played on the streets of New Orleans. We played everything. We played all of the parades, the church parades. Through that network, we met a lot of the older musicians. I used to watch them talk with my dad, and I was in earshot of some of the conversations and some of the things that they would say and how they would say it. They would talk about this music and how it should be done. To be able to be in that context and take it in and learn from those elders, such as Michael White, Greg Stafford. The list goes on and on.
Now, what years was this?
I would probably say late 70s. I was born in 68, so I was probably say late 70s. My very first gig was 1979, Mardi Gras Day. A saxophone player canceled at the last minute, and I think I knew 2 songs.
And your daddy recruited you?
Oh, yeah. He told me, he said, it's time to go to work. I was in 6th grade.
6th grade?
Yes. And, of course, at the end of the day, I got paid and, of course, was learning the music. So I said, yeah, I think I could probably get to do this a lot more.
So what did you start playing? Were you always a sax player?
Yeah, I started out on the alto saxophone. I started when I was in 4th grade. And, of course, and like I said, at the time when I did my first gig, I think I knew maybe 2 songs. But that's the thing about growing up in New Orleans, musical families. They take you from where you are and you begin there. You start to figure things out. Now, you can learn some things along the way. As most of the older musicians will tell you, you have to learn by ear. You learn by doing it. You learn by listening, by living it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You said you started in 4th grade. Were you taking lessons, or was this just learning at home by ear?
Well, actually, it was a little bit of both. There was a school, my elementary school, which was Tomalafon Elementary School, which was housed right in the middle of the Magnolia housing development. That was the school where a lot of uptown kids went. My music instructor at the time, Mr. Guy Lear, he was instrumental in teaching most of not only my older siblings, but a lot of the kids in the neighborhood went through that school. It was just a natural progression. Of course, we learned I guess you could say, the start of theory and the mechanics of music. But it was a great opportunity because we was learning outside of the school by doing parades and all of that. And so we was applying what we was learning, and we was finding out how it worked, how we could apply it, how it made sense, and all of those kind of things. It also taught us about a work ethic, about how we were supposed to come dressed. We had to come with the black and white. And this is not only in the family.
Strict.
Yes,
your dad was strict about that.
Yes, that was something from the tradition of New Orleans. Because like I said, it started in the church. And of course, when you go to church, you want to have your Sunday best. So you wear your black and white. So they stuck to that tradition, and you had to play the part in order to be grafted in, so you could go ahead and blossom and be able to be hired in those situations. So it was really, really great. It taught us respect in terms of what to do, what not to do, how to behave ourselves, all those kind of things, just an extension of what we was learning at home.
So, Mark, I want you to give us a little background on your musical family. and how you got started in music.
Come from a trumpet playing family. On my mom's side, my mom is the sister of Wendell and John Brunious, daughter of John Brunious Sr. And in that family, there were 8 siblings, all of whom played trumpet at some point.
Including your mom?
Yeah, my mom played trumpet. When I first started, I got her to play a couple of scales. Well, I mean, she had stopped playing a long time before that. She was very knowledgeable about music. She could hear when I was practicing if I was doing something wrong. Just being around trumpet players all her life, there was always a trumpet around. My brother played first. He's 3 years older. And so my uncle Wendell would give us horns, and there was always a trumpet around. Before I could play, I wanted to just mess around with it. So there was always a time where Wendell was giving a lesson or something like that, and I wanted to pick up and play. And he's like, "Man, put the horn down. So, stop playing right now."
So your lessons were with Wendell?
Well, yeah, I had a lot of informal lessons with Wendell.
Mm-hmm.
I mostly learned just from being around him. From when I was a very little kid, we went out to hear music every week. My earliest memories are going to Tradition Hall and listening to Papa French's band.
This is in the 70s?
Yeah, this was in the late 70s. Jeanette Kimball and Frank Fields, eventually Bob French, Don Sewer, Freddie Lonzo. Those were the people I was seeing when I was 3 years old. When I got a little older, Wendell was doing a gig at the Gazebo every week. John Royan and Barry Martin, Chris Burke. We used to go see that every week. Throughout that period, I wasn't playing. Finally, I wanted to join a school band. My friend had a saxophone. I wanted to play saxophone. And Wendell told my mom, he was like, I have a cornet. I'm going to give him a cornet. So he gave me a cornet. And I joined the band, and I loved it right away. So I did that for a year. In the following year, I switched schools, went to McMain. The band director needed French horn players. So I said, well, I like the French horn. I'll switch and start playing that. So I was playing French horn. And then I heard this trumpet player in the band that just blew my mind. I was like, and it's someone I had never met. I was like 12, 13, something like that. Like, who is this? I had to introduce myself to this guy. It was Nicholas Payton.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, man, okay, I don't want to play French horn anymore. I want to switch back to trumpet, So anyway, I switched back to trumpet and asked Wendell, man, have you heard of this guy, Nicholas Payton? Yeah, I know. That's Walter Payton's son, And
all in the family, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, as a kid, when I started showing a lot of interest, Wendell would take me around and to all these different clubs and introduce me to different people, Red Tyler, Ernie Ellie, Jermaine Basil. So he also encouraged me like, hey, man, play some brass band stuff. I already knew a lot of the songs and things like that. Application purposes, just knowing them and playing them at home. Like, yeah, get out, start playing. I joined a band called the Olympia Kid,
mm-hmm.
which was an offshoot of the Olympia brass band. It was the Olympia Junior. Then it was the Olympia Kid. I was in it, and Kerry Lewis was playing saxophone, and his brother was playing drums in it, and a few guys who went on to be in the Soul Rebels and things like that. Playing in brass bands. I used to do a lot of what they called green sheet in the French market. I got to know a lot.
What are green sheets?
They were union gigs, and they would give these green sheets, and everybody had to sign a green sheet in order to get paid. So we just called them green sheet gigs, and the leader would have the green sheet. Okay. We'd all sign them. From my understanding, the French market paid to have the entertainment out there.
But you played traditional jazz throughout.
Well, I went to the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, and we didn't concentrate on traditional jazz much. One of my biggest influences on trumpet was my teacher, Clyde Kerr Jr. We kind of concentrated on music from the 40s and beyond. So we played a lot of bebop, even more modern compositions from the 60s on, playing some of Clyde's music and Kid Jordan and Harold Batiste.
Yeah, so Clyde Kerr Jr., Nicholas Payton were some of your big influences. Roderick, who are some of your biggest influences?
There was a guy, his name is Alvin Thomas. If you listen to the original second line, that tenor sax solo, I was just totally blown away. When I would hear that song, I knew that it was Mardi Gras time. So I was taken aback with that. But there were many others, locals here, Kid Jordan, Kirk Ford, Leon Shake Snyder, just a lot beside Charlie Parker, Bird, Stanley Turrentine. I was listening to a lot. I had a lot of different influences. You
both kind of got into modern jazz and all, but you're playing traditional jazz pretty much the whole time, except for your Noka years.
We come up together playing this music, and we understood it. A funny story with me, I only went to Noka for 1 year because I wasn't really serious about the music then. I got introduced to Charlie Parker and John Coltrane and a great saxophone. I mean, trailblazers of the instrument. I went on my dad's jobs, traditional New Orleans jobs, playing that, and he let me play. And of course, I'm at 10th, 11th grade at the time in high school. The musicians would meet my father at the house, and they would meet there, and they would get into the cars and go to the gig. So he let me get dressed and everything. He said, "Where you going?" And I said, well, I'm going to the gig. That's when it hit me. He shook his head. He said, no, you haven't learned how to play this music. So it taught me a lesson, and he didn't hire me for 6 months. So I learned very quickly how to play and respect New Orleans traditional music. It was a hard lesson, I thought, at the time as a teenager growing up, but it was an invaluable lesson for me in terms of when he did hire me, I learned how to play the job. Even though when I started getting into other types of music, that's the thing that when we're on these different engagements together, I'll talk about Mark Braud and myself, we know what to play because we've had that experience. So we know the tradition in terms of how to play it, when to play, what to play. And it's really out of respect and love, because if we're now the torchbearers for this music, and if we don't do it, we can talk about other people moving to New Orleans and whatnot that don't get it. What they don't get is the music of New Orleans is a reflection of who we are as people and how we live, how we talk, how we interact.
I want to piggyback on what Roderick was saying about knowing what to do on jobs, knowing what to do on gigs, and how our elders have influenced us. So just in my family, Wendell and John, every time I would see them, they were dressed appropriately for the job. They conducted themselves professionally, showed up on time, knew the music. And another important thing is what we learned from them is being able to switch gears at any time. I've talked about this with a few people. At any time, you want to be able to switch gears to a different genre. A gospel tune might be called, a bebop tune might be called, or a New Orleans R&B song.
Because Wendell does that a lot.
Yeah, you have to be ready for that. And I remember one thing Wendell told me when I was really young. I was trying to learn these songs. Don't learn the songs for the sake of learning the songs. He said, learn them for life. It'll apply across the board at any time. That really stuck with me. And I think it's a thing that a lot of New Orleans musicians pride themselves on, is being able to do that. I can call Roderick for any kind of gig and feel confident that he's going to be able to come in and do it. That's the kind of the reputation that you want to have. Our approach to this music is a continuum of what we grew up in. We didn't just wake up and say, I want to do this.
It's your heritage.
It's our heritage. And we kind of knew these songs before we even picked up an instrument. Mm-hmm. We knew the tradition, we knew the style, we knew the songs, whether it be traditional New Orleans jazz or New Orleans R&B. We've been hearing this stuff our whole lives.
Y'all had this really unique experience, being that you grew up around these people that were professional musicians. What do you think? Are there kids coming up nowadays that are having that same experience?
It's important for young people to know the history of this music and the people, because the music is a reflection of the people that's playing it. Hopefully the young people can learn from us, and we're still learning and still learning ourselves, so we can constantly keep this, because you can't get this in Florida.
That's right.
You can't get this in Florida.
That's really true, yeah.
I'm really longing for and encouraging young musicians, come to us, find out what we know, do what we did with our elders. I wish I was seeing that more.
Yeah,
I don't see it, and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's not happening as much as I would like.
This episode of Everything New Orleans, the podcast, is being brought to you in part by the Jazz and Heritage Foundation's Community Partnership Grant, reinvesting the proceeds from Jazz Fest directly into the community, and by Red Clay Productions, Inc., producing content for every aspect of life, and from valued listeners like you. To subscribe to Everything New Orleans, the podcast, please visit www.everythingneworleans.buzzsprout.com.
When we were coming up, we came into this music just for the love. It was never about fame. It was never about our 15 minutes. I don't think we cared about that. I had a lot of heroes in this music. Bob French, Freddie Lonzo. First time I was on stage with them, I couldn't believe it. It was just such an incredible feeling. It was very intimidating. A lot of New Orleans musicians are nurturing, and they want you to do better. They want you to strive. I remember being on the gig for the first few weeks. It was Bob French's band. I played with Bob French for a few years, and he would call songs, and I wouldn't know them. But I would come back the next week, and I would know them, and I would ask him, can we play these songs? And he was like, yeah, of course.
You started going to see Bob French with Uncle Wendell Brunious, when you were a little kid.
A little kid, yeah. I remember at Tradition Hall, I became part of the act because I would always go up and ask Wendell for a quarter for the soda machine. There was a soda machine in there. And Bob French would just yell on the microphone, get off my stage. Go play in traffic.
Go play in the traffic. Yeah. I used to hear that when I was a kid.
So that was fun. Like I said, these guys are my heroes. Since I was a little kid, I remember seeing that record, the Tradition Hall record, with Wendell on the front with the big afro.
That was probably like 1978. I think that came out. Yeah,
something like that. To finally wind up on stage with those guys, because that's what I was aspiring to. I mean, I love playing brass band music, but the guys that I was seeing that I wanted to play with, I was aspiring to do that at the same time. I wanted to play with, Red Tyler and Ralph Johnson and Ed Frank. I wanted to play with these people. They weren't playing on the streets,
So there was the incentive.
Yeah.
To go practice. How much do y'all practice?
Every single day.
Yeah.
Every day.
It never stopped. For me, besides playing with my father and getting into other types of music, one of my local heroes is bassist George French. George French showed me how to play a gig, how to run a gig, how to select songs that people can identify, people music, he would call it. I mean, and even though those songs, they were fresh every time that we played it. And I learned so much from George French about how to conduct ourselves, showing up on time, being professional, all of those things. So that was, again, like Mark said, just a continuum of what I learned with my father and everybody else, and it constantly just keeps going and going. Mark and I have played with George French from time to time, so we're still crossing paths some 30, 40 years, and it's still going. But in terms of practicing, it never stops. We practice every day. I don't care if it's 15 minutes, because as we get older, we want to make sure that even though we're older, we still can have something to contribute. And for those young musicians that may ask us questions about certain things, hopefully we can impart some knowledge to them. And we want to sound good too, because as we get older, we know we're getting older. We want to sound good, and that's why we still keep practicing.
Yeah, so you're definitely carrying your family's tradition forward, both of y'all.
I remember first being hired for George's gig, and I played with his band too for a few years. I mean, he called all kinds of songs. Stuff that, I remember being on the gig. The horn section was Freddie Lonzo, Ralph Johnson on tenor, Freddie Lonzo on trombone. I was playing trumpet, and they knew all of this stuff. I just felt so defeated, and I went to George. I was like, man, I'm sorry. I don't know a lot of it. And he told me, he said, I tell you what, he didn't fire me. He said, on the next gig, bring a tape recorder and just record the whole gig. And I was like, okay. That's the kind of nurturing we had from our elders. That was a great thing. It wasn't cutthroat like, okay, man, you can't do it. That's it. I mean, I don't know, very young at the time. I can't remember how old, but
you couldn't go home and look it up on YouTube.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so you had to have a copy of it.
So I brought one of those little square box tape recorders, and I got a cassette, and I put it in there, and I recorded the gig, and you better believe I learned it, because I did not want to go back on that gig and be embarrassed. So
that's right.
Well, look, it's so funny.
That was a life lesson.
We talk about life lessons in George French. Do you know the song Soul Serenade?
Yeah.
Well, Soul Serenade.
Now he does.
You're right. We're on the gig. I'm on the gig with George French. We're at the Mont Leon Hotel. He called Soul Serenade. I've heard the song. Sometimes we'll get a song we can kind of figure our way through it. The old fish, throw the line out there like, help me. So wait a minute. George French calls the song. It's a standard by saxophonist Stanley Turrentine, and I didn't know it. And it's exactly what Mark said. I totally bombed. And this went on for 3 weeks. And that was the song that he would call 2 nights a week for 3 weeks. That was the first song that he would call. And sometimes I would be like, my God. But like Mark said, he didn't fire me. He encouraged me. And I kept getting better. And I just said, I'm going to do it. And that was so encouraging for me when he could have gotten somebody else. Again, that's our extended families. Even if you have an issue with your brother, you don't do certain things. You just find a way to work it out and say, hey, man, look, get on it. So because our network is so close, our network is real small. Instead of taking that attitude, it became the joke. So it's like, here we go. And I would be like, oh, my God. And that would be the first song. As soon as he would play that A flat, Mark, I would be like, Jesus Christ. But it was all in fun. And of course, after I learned it, and it was the same thing, similar things with my dad. We found the older guys, they were patient with us. They let us cut our teeth. They would let us explore other things along the way, even if we was making mistakes with them.
So y'all still practice? So y'all still learning?
Yep.
Is this a lifelong learning venture? And
I'm a saxophone player, but the last 3 years, I've really, really heard the clarinet. So I've played
That's right. You're playing clarinet
the clarinet
now.
over the years. I've read a little bit, but not really. Clarinet was not my thing. It's not.
That was Rickey. Rickey, your brother.
Yeah,
Rickey
my
Paulin.
older brother Rickey. I mean, it's a very difficult instrument to play, so I didn't really have the time over the years, So, but now the last 3 years, I've really dedicated at least an hour and a half to 2 hours a day playing the instrument because now I hear it. So it's taking care of two things for me. I want to be a good clarinetist. It also helps in terms of the tradition here in New Orleans because there are not a lot of good clarinet players. And again, no disrespect to anyone. It's just that there isn't enough. There's many saxophone players. New Orleans is a clarinet trumpet town. I think I'd like to feel that I'm doing my part in terms of learning the instrument and in terms of continuing that because it's needed.
What did your mama say when you picked up the clarinet?
Oh, my God. Listen, when my mother, about 2 years ago, my mom, she was old and I'm at the house, I'm sitting with her. So she knows I'm not a clarinet player. I got the clarinet with me and I take it out the case. So I'm getting ready to start practicing, sitting there with my mom. So my mom looks at me. She's like, oh, okay. So she lets me, I got the clarinet set up and she said, what you doing? I said, Mom, I'm about to start practicing. So she said, oh, okay. Maybe about 2 or 3 minutes passed. She said, look here. I don't want all that squeaking and squawking up in here. Because look, you're not no clarinet player because I done went through a lot of that with Rickey. Look, I'm telling you, if you're going to be doing all that squeaking and squawking up in here, look, don't be coming up in here with all that. And I just looked at it. I was like, okay, you've been feeling this way for how long? So
she remembers.
Right. Oh, yes, she does.
She
so
had a really strong memory of that, yeah.
But needless to say, that was still encouraging for me because in order to play those different styles, on a heartbeat, as Mark alluded to, you got to have command of the instrument, and that takes pride. That's not for the faint of heart. And again, it goes back to also work ethic. You have to practice that. You have to practice those long tones, and you don't have to. It becomes a thing of love. It's just who you are. It becomes a part of who you are if you want to be better as a professional musician. So
do you think you got that work ethic from your family?
I think from everybody who I've encountered that I respect. One of my main influences was Clarence Ford. I remember asking him, because I used to go to the Marriott. He and Gerald Adams had a gig at the Marriott for many years. And I would go there when I was in high school, and I'd sit in, and they'd let me play the whole gig. Sometimes they have a quartet with Ed Frank and Steve Blaylock. And it was just a great experience for me being around all these seasoned musicians. And I asked Clarence Ford how he knew so many songs. Because I had a few people say, man, you just learn the songs on the gig. And I was like, that doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. Let me ask Clarence Ford. This is somebody I really respect. I asked Clarence Ford, he said, and he was taken aback by the question. He said, no, man, I practice. I go home and I practice. That's how I know all these songs. Did that stick with me? So that's just one example. My grandfather, he died when I was really young. I have a few memories of him. What I do have are these recordings. It kind of let me know, like, as a trumpet player, where my uncles were coming from. So musically, I learned a lot from listening to my grandfather on records. As far as the people that I encountered on a regular basis, like Ed Frank and Clarence Ford and my uncles, Wendell and John and Bob French, Freddie Lonzo, they all believe in being professional on the gig, showing up dressed right. That was one thing I remember Bob commenting on, is that I always come dressed and ready for the gig. And now those things are important to me as a band leader. I think it's more of a community thing. We learn from everybody. We learn from everybody that we've encountered. I remember playing Danny Barker's funeral, and I was in college at the time, and I was coming from a class, and I didn't have my black and white. I showed up. I remember the green shirt I had on. I still remember it. Took out my horn. I was ready to play. And Greg Stafford told me, he said, yeah, man, you can play, but you have to go to the back, like get to the way to the back of the line. And you know what?
He was directing that.
Yeah.
That second line.
And man, what a valuable
mm-hmm.
lesson. What a valuable lesson, you know. And, you know, he was totally right. So fast forward a few years, he told somebody else the same thing. And there was a confrontation, totally different ball game now.
Yes.
And it's kind of scary.
This is a business. You're learning how to work. Mark learned that from his family. I learned that from our family.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Greg Stafford, he was trying to carry it forward.
Yeah.
You know, the tradition that he's upholding.
Right.
And he grew up with, and trying to pass it on to another generation.
It's a two-way street. So it was up to me to respect that And I did.
You listened to him. You went to the back. You wanted to play, but you went to the back.
Right.
So talking about carrying it forward, you've had the lineage coming in from your family, and now y'all have great musical careers. We're coming out of a pandemic. I know you've got the Slow But Steady CD. You had the Live in the Tradition CD over a year ago before this COVID thing happened. What's your direction now?
I'm doing a New Orleans traditional record on me on clarinet. Specifically.
On clarinet.
Yeah, so that's a goal that I'm working on. I think in terms of honoring the tradition, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to try to work on getting it done next year and involve other clarinetists in the city, such as Tom Fisher, Louis Ford. The clarinet instrument is not played a lot, and I'm dedicating it to my brother Rickey.
Yeah, so Mark?
Over the pandemic, I've written probably 300 plus songs.
300?
Yeah. In about a year.
I was going to say it's almost a song a day. Yeah.
Right. Between my wife and me.
Megan Schwartz.
Megan Schwartz, yeah. We've probably written close to 500 songs. We don't have a full recording studio in the house, but we've learned Pro Tools recording software. We've recorded about 300 songs. I've taken this opportunity to learn a lot. I've learned a lot about myself as a composer and arranger. I've written a lot of songs in the New Orleans tradition. I think that I can do quite a few gigs of all original material right now without repeating anything for a while.
Hey, look who's here.
Hey, what's
Come
up,
on in. Are you okay with us?
Welcome.
Have a seat. So, Herlin, we've been talking about Mark's history, Roderick's history, family history. I'm glad you came in because, wow, I mean, we have covered a lot of ground. We started with growing up in a traditional jazz family. I mean, primarily traditional jazz. There's other styles in the mix, but you had that experience too.
The music came to me naturally. I didn't have to go back and research it and find out the feeling of a swing rhythm versus R&B rhythms, or it was just always a part of me. And so growing up, my family was the Lasties. They had a combo. My Uncle Melvin played the trumpet. My Uncle David Lastie played the saxophone, and Walter Poppy Lastie played the drums. And then also their father, my grandfather, Frank Lastie, he was in the Waves home with Louis Armstrong back in 1913. He taught me how to play the early New Orleans drumming style of Baby Dodds and Louis Barberin and Paul Barberin. So I learned that style from my grandfather at the kitchen table with butter knives. Pull out some butter knives, and it was a game for me that he'd play a rhythm on the table and say, "Man, can you do that?" And I tried to do it, and I couldn't quite get it, all the nuances of the rhythm. And he would just laugh and quack, 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 quack. "Oh boy, you can't do that. Here, try it again." And that was a game for us. And then growing up with my Uncle Melvin and David Poppy and all those guys, they had a combo. My mom would roll my crib into the room where they were rehearsing, and that would be my pacifier. That would keep me quiet. The music kept me quiet,
wow.
And I was attentive even then. So all of my life, I knew that I wanted to be a professional musician. And because they were before me and they were professional musicians, I knew that there was a possibility that I could do that. I was never intimidated about music as a career. Early on in my marriage life, things were going kind of rough, bills not being paid and that kind of thing. And my wife was like, "Man, you should go down to Swagman and get you a job because they need a manager in the produce section. So you go down there and apply for the job." I was like, "I'll tell you what. You go down there, you apply, and let me know how it works out for you." And so I had the confidence. I really had the confidence to be a musician. Like I said before, because of my uncles before me, it gave me that kind of confidence to know that I could pursue a career in music. And sure enough, I did. And, here we are 45 years later. Growing up here in New Orleans is a really enlightening experience. And it also gives you so much entrees into different styles of music because this is a pretty small city. In this city, it's really rich with a lot of different styles of music. You can play traditional jazz music, you can play progressive jazz music, you can play funk music, you can play Latin music, you can play Zydeco music, you can play country western, you can play whatever you want to do right here in this city. There's a venue that supports all these kinds of styles. And I've been very, very fortunate over the years that I've been able to engage in all of those different kinds of genres of music.
You have. Y'all all had great role models, I got to say. And just, within your family, what we talked about before you came in with Roderick and Mark was that it all started with the family growing up, like you've just told us about. But then you went out. You had a lot of influences outside the family, too. It just grew and grew and grew. Who were your early influences outside of your family?
Outside of my family definitely was Smokey Johnson. Because of my uncles being musicians, all these guys were coming around. Smokey Johnson, Eddie Bowe, Frogman Henry. Professor Longhair used to come to my house and play at my grandmother's piano and kicking the side of the piano. And And there was an indentation in the piano where Professor Longhair would be playing and keeping his time and kicking it with the side of his foot. Dr. John would come to the house and play. And they were just regular people to us. Who Shot the Lala, Oliver Morgan. And they were just regular guys in the neighborhood as far as my family was concerned. As I grew up and got to hear their music and to know who they were on a broader musical scale, I gained so much respect for who I was being influenced by and who I was being touched by. As I said earlier, New Orleans is a melting pot of so many different styles, and they were all there and always supportive. And one thing I got to say about New Orleans musicians, especially the older musicians, they were always giving you advice and giving you support and giving you tutelage and mentorship as to how to be not only a musician, but also how to be a great human being, how to become a man, how to be a professional musician. Danny Barker would always say, whenever you go on the bandstand, man, make sure you act like you want to be there. My uncles, they said to me, you're a public servant when you're playing music because people coming out to hear you play, you don't know what they went through before they got to you, finding a babysitter or arrange transportation or whatever, and paying a cover charge and all that kind of stuff. So you owe it to them to give them a good performance every time. And so I kind of took that advice and I tried to live up to that, you know, whenever I'm performing.
Do y'all remember the first time y'all played together?
Herlin was the grand marshal in a second line club in the Ninth Ward. I think it was the Double Nine.
Yeah.
I was playing in the Rebirth Brass Band, and I knew Herlin from playing with other people. I've seen him playing like with Winton, but the way that Herlin second lines is the way that he is as a person. I joke with Herlin all the time. When you see Herlin Riley play, he's all over the place because that's his personality. We just regular everyday people, and we just having fun. It comes through the music, you know. So, and that's something you can't learn in a book. You only can learn that by being around those musicians and living that life.
Mark, any memories?
My earliest memory is at Donna's. I think it was a George French gig. Oh, no, you know what? It might have been Willie Metcalf.
Yeah.
That might have
been.
Yeah. I think that was the first time I played with Herlin. I had been seeing him many years playing with Wynton Marsalis and Ahmad Jamal. And the George French one popped in my head because, oh, man, that gig was on fire. I was just like, oh, my goodness. Got to play, man. Wow, George and Herlin. I was like, oh, my goodness.
I became aware of Roderick definitely through his family. Doc Paulin, your brothers, they had a brass band. And I was doing the Fairview band
with Danny Barker.
With Danny Barker. And Leroy Jones was a part of the band, and Tuba Fats, and Dr. Michael White, and Greg Stafford, and Lucian Barber. And those are some of the people who were in the band. They would always talk about Doc Paulin's band. Doc Paulin was one of the people that was running parallel to the Fairview band. They were young musicians as well. I didn't know Roderick per se. I knew his name. And then we've had a collaboration over the years that's been very, very wholesome and very genuine. With Mark, it's kind of like the same thing. I knew Mark's uncle, Burnell. Burnell and I was in high school at Frederick, River Frederick together, and he played the trumpet as well. So Burnell would talk about, man, I got my older brother, John Brunious, man, he can play, man. And then he talked about Wendell. I got to meet Wendell. This is a true story. Wendell and I played with a guy named Leroy Robinette and Sigmund Walker. They had big bands that they would rehearse at the Union Hall. Yep. And we rehearsed every Sunday, but we never had a gig.
I think it's safe to say we've all been through that, right?
We never had a gig. And then when we did get a gig, the gig paid about $17 or something like that. But anyway, it was a good experience because, I got to meet Wendell and to play with him. This is a true story. I got a gig playing at the 500 Club on Bourbon Street. I was subbing one night for the trumpet player and one night for the drummer because I was playing trumpet and drums. I was doing this 500 Club gig. Both the guys who I was subbing for quit at the same time. The drummer quit and also the horn player quit. I took the job as a drummer because I knew the routine of all the dancers and all the acts. So I knew how to catch when they kicked their leg up or whatever they was doing.
Catch the bumps.
Yeah, catch the bumps, the tom-toms or whatever. So they hired me as a drummer, and then they needed a horn player. One day I happened to go down to Sears department store.
On Barone Street.
On Barone Street. Wendell was working in there in the sporting goods section. I bumped into Wendell. I said, hey, man, I hadn't seen him in a little while, maybe a year or so. I said, hey, man, are you still playing your horn? You're in here selling fishing poles and that kind of stuff. I said, man, are you still playing your horn? He said, yeah, I'm still playing. I said, well, listen, come on down to the 500 Club and audition for this gig. He comes down and he auditions, and sure enough, he gets the gig. And he and I played at the 500 Club for about 2 years. He never took another day job after that experience. He came to the 500 Club. He'll tell you this. He never took another day job. We shared the information. We shared that kind of bond. And Wendell was actually my best man in my wedding when I got married.
Well, I'm glad that worked out for him.
Yeah, so it worked out. I think he was probably on the verge of kind of putting the horn down. During that time, he picked it up, never put it down again.
Yeah, now when it comes to traditional jazz, we've talked a lot about Mark and Roderick coming up in a family together. Traditional jazz was their life. What do you see like the future? It's changing pretty drastically, huh, Herlin?
Well, everything evolves.
Mm-hmm.
Everything evolves. And I guess the stuff that we were playing, the people who came before us would say that we weren't playing it exactly how it should go. Jazz music is a living, breathing art form, and it has its own life. When you deal with the tradition, it expands. My thing is that it's okay to expand, but keep the root of what's going on in perspective. Younger musicians now, they're playing. A lot of the roots are in place. A lot of the traditions that they're getting away from. And it's unfortunate to me in a lot of ways. They're moving forward so fast that they're forgetting about really the essence of what it really means to be in a traditional brass band. I was at a jazz funeral. Ordinarily, when the body is leaving the church or the funeral parlor, there's a traditional dirge. There's a slow dirge, a hymn, a mournful hymn that's being played. It's a solemn kind of thing at that particular point. And then when you cut the body loose, that's when the preacher says a few words over the deceased, call it cutting the body loose. Then you go into the up-tempo part of the tradition. But I saw this young band, as soon as they came out of the funeral parlor, they started playing, "Oh, Casanova," do, 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 do.
Of all songs, yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness, where is the dirge? Where is the hymn? The solemn part of that procession. They just couldn't wait to get to the up-tempo.
The party.
The party part of it. It really, really irks me.
No respect for the tradition, but it's not just no respect, it's no knowledge of the tradition. And I think that's what's happening with upcoming generations, is they really are not learning because they're just not seeing it like it was.
There's no quest for knowledge. It's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
We found out the things that we wanted to find out because we were searching. We wanted it. We saw what our elders were doing, and we wanted to emulate them
learn by example.
And continue the tradition and learn by their example. So I think it's a lack of a quest for knowledge, and it's tricky to say why that's happened. I don't really know. I totally encourage it. I want people to come and ask me questions like I was able to ask my elders questions.
It's not only a quest for knowledge. I think there's a level of fear among musicians. And because for me, I was looking at older musicians that were doing other things, such as Herlin, such as Mark. I look at the accomplishments, and I used to think sometimes, wow, can I do that myself?
I can understand what Roderick is talking about, having fear. When you really are diligent and you practice and you really hone your skills on your instrument, that gives you confidence. That in itself will give you confidence. Now you have ability. When you have ability, it gives you the confidence that you can step and stand tall in your ability. New Orleans culture is very, very strong. It needs to be nurtured, and it needs to be perpetuated. And I find that if we don't cherish it and nurture it, it'll get away from us. Because now we have a lot of influx of people who are coming from different places around the world. It's going to be changed in time to come. That's one of the disappointing things I find. And as Mark was saying, there's no quest for the knowledge. A young musician can come out and play a gig and get paid whatever they get paid. That gives them a certain kind of validation. They've arrived now. There's no more study, or there's no more quest for the knowledge now, because they're making $2 or whatever it is that they're getting paid.
Do you still practice?
Yes, I still practice.
Because these two guys had said they practice every day. So yeah.
Yes, I practice. I'm always engaging with my instrument.
There's a lot of work that goes into a lot of these different things, like playing these old marches and memorizing all of these parts. High society, climax rag, whatever it may be, memorizing these verses and things like that. It's a totally different animal from memorizing a pop song, And so you have to be willing to put in that work or have some interest, listen to these records and be inspired by them. If you're not drawing any inspiration from that, then it just leaves that void between what was and what is.
You mentioned High Society. Roderick, you working on that solo?
Listen, we played that High Society last week with Herlin Riley, and we played it. Yeah, it's always room for improvement, but yeah, I'm on it. Without a doubt. And to be in that tradition of still being able to perform, because even though High Society is almost 100 years old or older, but it's still fresh every time we play it. Who knows who may be hearing it for the very first time.
Well, any closing remarks?
Thank you for allowing me to come in and be a part of this podcast.
I'm so glad you're here.
And, it was kind of like last minute thing that I was able to make it. And I just want all the listeners to just appreciate the culture that we have here in New Orleans. For the younger musicians who are listening, go out and invest some time into learning this culture and to learning the canon of music that we have here. because it's so rich. Learning a lot of these traditional songs will help you in your advancement to playing other styles of music. Popular music that we know of today, most of it was generated right here in New Orleans. The drum set as we know it was invented here in New Orleans by D.D. Chandler and John Robish, where they invented the foot pedal. That brought the whole drum set together as a package. There's so much history here. You won't find a more influential musician than Louis Armstrong. Invest some time into learning his music, learning some Sidney Bechet music. This music will help you to expand your whole horizon, your whole musical knowledge.
Yeah, Roderick, any closing remarks?
Sally, I think what you're doing in terms of trying to keep a historical sense of tradition of New Orleans is important for years to come. Hopefully the next generation can take some of what we're talked about and maybe build upon it and do better than what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and Mark?
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here among Herlin and Roderick. I really appreciate you giving us the platform to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, I appreciate all of you coming in and giving up your time, because I know things are starting to start up again.
Yeah.
So everybody's getting busy. So I really, really appreciate it. And I really and truly believe that the future of music is in good hands with the three of you. I got Herlin Riley, Roderick Paulin, and Mark Braud, all from New Orleans, all career musicians that came from great musical families. What a unique experience the three of you had, and how different it would have been for all three of you if you had not been in those families that nurtured you and really brought you to where you are today.
Yes.
We all have a lot to be thankful for. We're thankful for you, and I know y'all are thankful for everything.
Well, thank you so much, Sally, for having us. We really appreciate it.
And Herlin, Monk brought some cookies there, bro. Look, I don't want no cookies.
I'm hurting myself on one. Ooh.
Fresh baked.
See what he doing?
This is what we need the video. Thanks for listening to Everything New Orleans. I'm Sally Young, and this podcast was created to share the stories that originate from my experience working as a media professional in radio and conducting interviews at music festivals and events locally and around the world. Everything New Orleans, the podcast, is an extension of my joy and my service as a native New Orleanian. And special thanks to Megan Schwartz for the cookies.